Good job. All right, you guys can sit down. Whew. That is like, if I had to pick like a Mosaic theme song, I'd pick that one. I love that song, man. Singing about God bringing us out of Egypt. Applicable to anybody in here. Is this center? I don't want you guys to feel lopsided today if I stand in the wrong spot. It'd be weird. How you guys doing? Good? All right. One person's excited to be here. That's good. Well, hey, before we get going, I want to make an announcement because we're going to end a little different today. Right outside, so we had the Easter Bunny here today. I don't know if you noticed, I wasn't just random. It's supposed to be drawing attention to a little thing we do every year called Operation Easter Basket. So Amanda, our outreach director, has done a whole lot of legwork to collect the names of some kids and families in our area who maybe don't have the means to have a really cool Easter. And we now are going to supply them with Easter baskets for the year. So Amanda went out of her mind this year and she got 300 kids' names. So yeah, that's like, I don't know, you guys are clapping for that, but like that's the need. Now we have to supply the need. So I will ask you to clap again when we've taken all of those home and you volunteered to help solve the problem. There, shamed. If you love Jesus, you would, no, I'm just kidding. But right outside after this service is over, she'll be right out there. I think first service took around 100 of them, so still about 200 left. So obviously you should take the rest of them. And then she won't have any anxiety tonight. So that would be cool. And then she won't text me and say, oh my gosh, we still have some left. Why doesn't this church love Jesus? And I'll have to talk her down off the cliff and all that. So, but yeah, really cool thing. And it's a huge impact. For me, I love this because it's like we don't get anything for it. You know what I'm saying? It's just something that we just want to give to people and just love people. And that's what we're called to do. So, and it's a perfect time of year to do it. All right, so if this is your first-ish time here, we are in a series going through the book of Nehemiah. And we're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 4 today. But I wanted to start this morning by acknowledging how important expectations are. Your expectations really dictate a lot about how you feel about your life. Your expectations of how something is going to go actually has a greater impact about how you feel about how the thing goes than how the thing goes. Does that make sense? Let me say it a different way. Your expectations of the experience in a lot of ways are more important than the actual experience. It's more about what you thought was going to happen than what actually happens. There's a gap, a very dangerous gap between your expectations and reality. And that is really important in your life. For example, if you're driving somewhere and your GPS tells you it's going to take you 50 minutes to get there, and it takes you 50 minutes to get there, you're fine, right? Generally. Unless there's kids in the back seat, you're fine, right? But if your GPS, you can get in the car and your GPS tells you it's going to be 25 minutes and then you hit traffic and it takes you 50 minutes to get there, totally different emotional state, right? Same exact car ride, 50 minutes both, but your emotional state is drastically changed because your expectations were different than reality. Another example, if you're a parent and you, for one reason or another, are going to take your kids to go out to eat in an actual restaurant, and you have the expectation that you're going to have a good time. See, the veteran parents are laughing. The rookie parents are like, what are you talking about? Why wouldn't it be fun? Well, if you'd like to listen, I could tell you, but you maybe need to experience it for yourself. But the truth is, when you have young children, going out to eat is not a fun experience. And for me, I have 4 kids, so I have to take out a second mortgage just to do it. And then, when we're there, we're already spending a ton of money, and I got one kid, going crazy. I got one, hiding under the table crying. I got another one staring off into the distance, ignoring everyone. And two of those are Lisa, right? After... In all seriousness. Now, expectations going into that, let's be honest, no matter what you expect, I believe if you have young kids going into a restaurant, you're not going to have a great time. Unless you have better kids than mine, I don't think the experience itself is going to be all that great. But what your expectations do there, actually it'll change like the conclusions you come to as you're walking out of the experience. So if you expected to have a good time and didn't have a good time, you're going to walk out of the restaurant going, oh my gosh, are we bad parents? Like, what's wrong with us? See, but that's because you had this expectation that it was going to be fun. If you knew going in that having young kids going into a restaurant is not going to be an enjoyable experience, then you walk out going, it's not that you're bad parents, it's just that you're parents, right? And you just have kids, and this is just going to be your life, and you can go out to eat again in 15 years when you don't have them anymore. So your expectations, they change. I mean, think about this. They change how you feel about the thing when you're going through the thing. They also change like the conclusions you come to after the thing is over. And that's really, really important, really important. So let me give you the one I want to zoom in on today, the expectation that we really want to hit today. When you set out to live the life that God has called you to live, expect opposition. Expect opposition. When you decide to pursue God's will in your life, expect opposition. When you decide to say yes to God in some area of your life, expect opposition. Now, the reason for this is there's twofold here. And listen, Christian, this is really important. One, if you don't expect opposition when you're stepping out to do God's will, you're going to have a bad time, right? Like it's going to be a surprise that you get punched in the mouth, which is, that would kind of be like stepping into a boxing ring and being surprised that you get punched. Like it doesn't make any sense. You are stepping out to do something that God wants you to do. Your experience will be drastically changed if you don't expect for opposition to come and hit you in the face. But secondly, and this one's really important to me, I think a lot of times Christians have this mentality that like if things get difficult, if you experience pushback on some path that you're on, that like that's a sign from God that you chose the wrong thing. Like a lot of Christians, I think the moment they make a choice and things get hard, they go, uh-oh, did I choose the wrong path here? And man, that really, really bothers me because there's no story in the Bible where that's true. Where, oh, things are hard. Oh, that's a sign from God that we must be going the wrong direction. Most of the time, it's the opposite, by the way. That's, for me, in my life, like if things are going too good, I'm like, uh-oh, did I do something wrong, God? Like, why is everything great right now? This is weird. I expect it to be a difficult thing to go in the direction that God wants me to go. And man, I run into so many, oh, my marriage is hard. Maybe I married the wrong person. No. You had a 1 in 8 billion chance, but I just don't think that there's anybody that you could have married that it wasn't going to. It's not that marriage is hard because you married the wrong person. Marriage is hard because marriage is hard. Or maybe you're in college and you hit a class or two that are kicking your butt and you're like, oh, maybe I'm not just cut out for college. No, that's not. Stop using things getting difficult as evidence that you chose the wrong thing. That's not the way it works. When you choose to follow God in your life, when you choose to follow God in an area of your life, expect opposition. I can't tell you, this is just anecdotally as a pastor, I can't tell you how many people I talk to who decide to come to church for the first time, and that morning is a nightmare of a morning for them. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think oh yeah, your kids must be no, it's just when you take a step towards the decisions that God wants you to make, you're gonna have opposition hit you in the face. So know that going in, Christian. And I just want to ease some people's fears. I think sometimes people, specifically spiritually, you start to make some right choices and you immediately get hit and the voice inside your head's going, is there something wrong with me? Am I off here that I'm trying to follow God and it's hard for me? Because you look around at other people and they look like everything's going great, but they're all liars. Everybody's struggling. Everybody's having a hard time. So I just wanted to ease some people's internal fears. It's going to be hard. You're going to have opposition when you try to follow God in your life. We're going to see this today in the story of Nehemiah. To catch you up super quick, Cliff's Notes version, Nehemiah is called by God to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem. And he sets out to do that. God's hand is upon him in every way. God has moved to position and provide for the different things that happen in that. He gets all the people of Jerusalem really excited and they start to work. And at this point in the story in chapter 4, they've almost gotten to about halfway done. So the wall is almost halfway there. And it's been a great first half. It's been a great first half, so call it halftime. But how many of you know, even if you have a great first half, it's not how you start, it's how you finish that really makes the difference here. And this is where things get interesting for them, right in that messy middle. And that's hard too sometimes, right? It's not just starting. Sometimes starting at least can carry the wave of the excitement of starting something. And if you get close to the end, you at least got the light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes the hardest place is right in the middle, where you don't have the energy that's starting something, you don't quite have that light at the end of the tunnel feeling, you're just right there in the middle. And that's where they find themselves in this part of the story. So chapter 4, verse 1, the opposition shows up. Sanballat was very angry when he heard we were rebuilding the wall. He flew into a rage and mocked the Jews, saying in front of his friends and Samaritan army officers, what do these bunch of poor, feeble Jews think they're doing? Do they think they can rebuild the wall in a single day just by offering a few sacrifices? Do they actually think they can make something of stones from a rubbish heap and charred ones at that? So this guy named Sanballat sees that they're rebuilding the wall, and he comes in to really just kind of make fun of them, right? He's just throwing insults here. But the mockery is designed to deflate and discourage them, right? Now, at first, when you read this first time around, it just kind of seems like he's just popping off at the mouth. But if you look at the insults, they're actually pretty specific. And he's going after some very, very, I want to say it's just eerie how close to the insecurities they probably already had inside of themselves that he hits on. Have you ever had that happen? Where you already got the voice inside your head telling you some things, and then you hear someone else's voice say the same thing as the voice inside your head? That's a scary, discouraging experience. So my guess is they already felt a lot of this, because first, look, he attacks their ability. He calls them poor, feeble Jews. So if you've ever started something, any beginner feels like their ability is not very good, right? So they're already feeling like, hey, I'm not a wall builder. This isn't the thing I do. They're already feeling a little insecure about their ability, and he comes in and he attacks their ability. Again, matching the voice that was probably already in their head. And then, if you know the little line here, it's subtle. He says, do they think they can rebuild the wall in a single day just by offering a few sacrifices? That's actually an attack on their spiritual life. So he's kind of coming in and saying, what, haven't you guys been following God for like 5 seconds? You've offered a couple of sacrifices. For the whole time of your life before then, you haven't been doing what God wants you to do, and now you're going to show up for 5 seconds and you think God's going to bless this? That's what he's saying. And that's a big one too, right? If you've ever decided, you know what, I need to get back in to following God, I really need to get back into faith, that's one of the big ones you get hit with. Is to say, what about all the time I wasn't following God? And he's pressing on that here too. And then he also attacks, in this little insult string, their past by talking about the rubbish heap and the burnt wood and all that. Because he's implying, by the way, that, hey, isn't the reason this wall's torn down your fault, Jews? That's what he's saying, right? And it is. They weren't following God. The walls got torn down because they weren't following God. So he's saying, hey, look at what you did. You're actually in the consequences of your stupid choices anyways. So he's, again, just echoing on the outside what they were already feeling on the inside. So these insults are just so perfectly precise. Now, one more. I just want to throw this in here. He's got a buddy named Tobiah, verse 3. Tobiah the Ammonite, who was standing beside him, remarked, that stone wall would collapse even if a fox walked along the top of it. I hate Tobiah, he's stupid. I feel like I imagine, if you ever watch like a movie where they have like the main villain who's actually scary, and then he has like a sidekick who's not scary at all but tries to pretend to be scary. That's Tobiah. He's like, oh, the fox up on the wall would fall over. Like, shut up, Tobiah, you're stupid. Like, why are you even talking? I bet Sanballat like smacked him like, shh. I was actually doing a good job insulting them, and now you did that. But I will say, you could put a subject heading over this one as well. He's attacking their progress, right? And think about that too. If you've ever started to try and do something, specifically in the area of your faith, and at first stuff takes a lot of effort to make a little progress, right? And that's what he's pointing out, because they've done their best so far. They've been building the wall the best they can do. They're putting out massive amounts of effort, and that's what they've produced. It's this wall that's not, it's not even half done yet. And that can be a very discouraging thing to be thrown in your face as well. Like somebody almost being like, wait, you tried? This was you putting in full effort? All of these insults designed to discourage and deflate them, attacking their ability, their spiritual life, their past, and their progress. For some of you, it isn't even voiced on the outside. You just have this opposition happening on the inside. You're doing this to yourself. You're questioning your own ability. You're questioning your own spiritual life. You're questioning your own past. You're questioning your own progress. You don't even need somebody to say it. You're already doing it to yourself. But I want to make a connection here, because this is happening. So I don't know, just to imagine, the ancient Near East, and they're rebuilding this wall, and they're sweating, and it's a whole thing. And then you've got these guys standing outside the wall yelling insults over the wall, and you're like already thinking, ugh, just kind of getting beat down by the whole experience in the physical. But I want to point out that this isn't just a physical discouragement. There's a spiritual aspect to what's happening here. And this is important for you to know as well. That when you take a step of faith, when you pursue God's will in your life, and then you face opposition, that opposition that you're facing, there's a spiritual aspect to it. There's a spiritual flavor that happens when you get this kind of pushback. Because again, the blows are too precise here. The timing's too precise here. Sanballat and Tobiah, I don't think they're this smart. I actually think there's something behind it, and I want to prove it to you. So every once in a while, the Bible, it'll pull back the curtain on the physical and show us what's happening in the spiritual. It's some of my favorite stuff in the Bible where you actually get to see that, hey, this is what's happening in the physical, and then, oh, this is what's happening in spiritual. Some of the coolest stuff that's in there. And in this case, we get a little glimpse. So if you would jump over to the book of Zechariah, which you don't know where that is because it's a little tiny book in the Old Testament, unless you memorized all the books of the Bible. It's a prophet in the Old Testament. Now, he's a prophet around the same time as Nehemiah is rebuilding the wall. And he has a vision. He sees into the spiritual in this vision about one of the people who came back to Jerusalem with Nehemiah named Jeshua. Now, Jeshua is the high priest, so he's kind of a big deal. And Jeshua is going to end up helping rebuild the temple. So Nehemiah is called to rebuild the walls. Jeshua is called to help rebuild the temple. And Zechariah has this vision about Jeshua. And I want you to see what happens in the spiritual here. Zechariah chapter 3, verse 1. Then the angel showed me Jeshua, the high priest, standing before the angel of the Lord. The accuser, Satan, was there at the angel's right hand, making accusations against Jeshua. Now that's crazy. You're telling me that we just read something in Nehemiah where there's these guys in the physical making accusations against the people of Israel, and then you jump over to Zechariah and he pulls back the spiritual curtain, and at the same time, another guy who's also called to do what God's called him to do, he's getting these accusations from Satan in the spiritual. So for me, this shows us that, hey, what's happening in the spiritual is being mirrored in the physical. It's not the other way around, right? Like this is Satan's plan. He's doing some things in the spiritual, stirring things up in the physical. There is a spiritual component to the opposition that you face when you try to follow God in your life. There is. And Satan's timing here is no accident, right? He sees that people are excited about rebuilding this wall. He sees that people are stepping up to follow God in their lives. He sees what good is going to come from them following God in their life, and he wants to stop it. I think that can be true in your life too. When you start to take a step towards God, Satan doesn't like that. He wants to stop you. That's why it's hard. Now, that's intimidating, right? I don't know about you. I can handle Sanballat. I certainly can handle Tobiah if he's anything like I'm imagining him in my head. I feel like I can handle those boys. But when you find out that there's like a spiritual fuel behind it, that's a little intimidating. That the opposition you're facing is not just physical, it's also spiritual. So, what I want to do is I want to look at the way Nehemiah handles this. I want to show you 4 things here that Nehemiah does in the face of opposition. So verse 4, if you're familiar with Nehemiah's story, this will be no surprise. Then I prayed. Hear us, our God, for we are being mocked May their scoffing fall back on their own heads, and may they themselves become captives in a foreign land. Do not ignore their guilt. Do not blot out their sins, for they have provoked you to anger and fear in front of the builders. Okay, so step one, if you're facing opposition in your life, pray. Surprised to hear that in church? I know that's one of those ones where you're like, yeah, thanks, Pastor. I knew that already. But here's what I want to point out about Nehemiah is if you're just scanning his story here, Nehemiah doesn't just pray. For Nehemiah, prayer is like a reflex, right? Anytime something happens, this is the thing that he does. He immediately prays, immediately prays, immediately prays. It's a knee-jerk reaction. So I want to ask, what's your knee-jerk reaction when things happen in your life? When you face opposition, when you have catastrophe hit, when you have pain, when you have suffering, when you have things hit like that, what's your knee-jerk reaction? Cuss words? No? Oh, we're in church. You would never do that, totally. Fear, anxiety, anger. What's your knee-jerk reaction? Because Nehemiah, and I don't think this is just something that naturally happens. Nehemiah has developed in himself the reaction of prayer. The knee-jerk now is his instinct is pray. And I think that's something that you develop. And for me, I don't know about you, I just look at that and go, man, I want that. I want for my instinct, my immediate instinct when stuff hits, prayer. I love that. I love that. So I think that's something to be a goal in our lives. And I think you have to be intentional about it before it starts happening unintentionally. Now, I want to point out something, the content of this prayer. I don't know if that threw you off at all, some of the stuff he prayed in that prayer. Now, I don't have time to go into all of it. We will talk about this. We got a sermon series here planned out in the summertime where we will look at a prayer that's like this in the Bible. I don't have time to go into all this. I just want to point out that he doesn't pray the right thing. He prays the real thing. He doesn't pray the right thing. He prays the real thing. This is like a theologically incorrect prayer, but it was where he was, here. So sometimes I don't know what you've experienced when you face opposition, but it can be an emotional thing, right? You can get in a bad place emotionally. And what Nehemiah does here is he uses prayer as a way to process emotions. And I think that's really important. I think sometimes we just think of prayer as like asking God for stuff. And some of y'all, you pray way too nice and good prayers like, okay, Lord, this is how I'm supposed to think about this person. Nehemiah's like, yeah, I'm not there yet. I'm going to pray for you to not forgive them, which is something you're not supposed to pray for somebody. But he's going to pray something mean because that's how he feels. Now, I think that praying the real thing will lead you into praying the right thing, but don't start in the right place if your heart feels in the wrong place. I think you need to pray whatever's in your heart. And the way my mentor always described it was like getting poison out. And God's the only one that can handle that. Do you know that? I know some of you are like, but my best friend, we vent to each other all the time. Well, your best friend can't handle that, okay? Yes, she can. No, she really can't. I promise she can't handle. That's too much poison coming out of you. It's going to affect her. It won't affect God. So I actually think you should vent to God. All the stuff, all the things. We were joking, we were over in the cafe working the other day. Some of the guys were making fun of me, like, you're the only pastor I've ever heard tell people to cuss. I'm like, yeah, that's unique. But I think for some of you, to be real in prayer, you would have to cuss, because that would be really you. I want to say that would be a test for you. If you normally cuss in your life and you don't cuss in prayer, maybe you're doing it wrong. Is that weird to say? Some of you are like, there's a Lutheran church. Right now, I'm just kidding. Oh, this is second service too. Hi, online tribe. Usually that happens first service when I say stuff like that. But for real, but the reason Nehemiah is able to be stable in front of other people is because he was unstable in prayer with just him and God. And that you have to know that. Don't look at the people who look like rocks and be like, they're always rocks. No, they're not. They fall apart in prayer. They get all that stuff out in prayer, and then they're able to be the rock out in public. You need that. You need a place to fall apart. You need a place to put, if you're like me, see, my knee-jerk reaction is prayer, my knee-jerk reaction is anger. I got to put that somewhere, and it's prayer. I give that stuff to God, and then most of the time I'm able to hold it together in real life because I've already gotten it out. So that's Nehemiah's first thing, is prayer. Prayer that helps you emotionally process things when you hit that opposition. Now, here's what happens. The work on the wall continues. Their insults don't stop it. It continues. So Sanballat and Tobiah, they up the pressure. They go from insults to planning an actual attack. They start to gather an army. They want to actually physically now stop this work that has begun. So here's what Nehemiah does in response to that. Drop down to verse 9. But we prayed to our God and guarded the city day and night to protect ourselves. So again, he's got prayer in there. And I love this verse because it's got both in it, right? It says we prayed and we guarded the city. They did both. They didn't just pray and not guard the city. They didn't run out and guard the city without praying. They did both. And I think, listen, if you're a Christian, we tend to fall off on one of two sides here. You either, you're more of the person who really loves to pray but doesn't do much, or you're the person who forgets to pray and runs out and does everything. I don't know which one you are. And if you're perfectly balanced, that's awesome. You should come preach this part. You'd be better at it than I am, because I struggle with this. I fall off on the side of I want to run out and go do stuff, and I struggle to be like, oh crap, I gotta bring this to God. But I know a lot of people are the opposite. They want to pray and then go, all right, God, do the thing. So I don't know which one you are, but whichever one you are, you need to know that, especially Nehemiah, and he's so good at this, he prays like it all depends on God, but he works like it all depends on him. And I love that mentality. If you could hold that tension in your life, to pray like it all depends on God, but work like it all depends on you, it would be amazing, because you see the way God works with this in Nehemiah's life. He has the prayer and he has the sweat that goes into what he's praying about. So listen, if you struggle with the prayer part, maybe you're like me and you're more of a doer, and you get out there and you start running, and then you're like, oh, yeah, I need God. A mentality, something that catches me, there's this verse in the book of James. It's really cool or haunting, depending on where you're at in your spiritual walk. This verse says, you don't have because you don't ask. And that's a crazy thing. It's one of the most profound calls to prayer, I think, in the Bible, just in that short sentence. The reason you have a lack in your life is because you haven't asked God for those things. That's crazy to think. And for me, being one of those guys who's like, let's go, do. I have to stop and ask myself, hey, what if the only thing that happens is the stuff I've prayed about? Uh-oh. That's... And there's another verse that talks about if the soldiers guard the city, but God's not a part of it, they guard it in vain. You can't just go out and guard a city and expect to be able to do it without God, especially if God's calling you to something that's bigger than you. So for me, if you're more of a doer like me, you need to ask yourself the question, man, have I prayed? What if the only thing that happened now is what I've prayed about? Oh, no wonder nothing's moving. You don't have because you don't ask. So if you're over here, reflect on that. Now, if you're over here, the kind of Christians who pray and then, you sit down, crisscross applesauce, and you just all right, God, go do your thing. Now, if you've gone to this church for very long at all, you know that I don't like Carrie Underwood theology. She's a great singer, but she's not, Jesus take the wheel while I sleep in the back seat. That's not a thing. That's not a thing. And I just want to tell you, I feel like prayer is so important. But they didn't pray and then go, because here's the thing, and I don't know where it comes from, but I'm guessing one of the things that gets in your head on this side, if you're like a prayer and then I sit there kind of a person, is that you think, well, if I get up and do something, it's like I lack faith in the prayer, right? Because can't you imagine, imagine all these Israelites gathering, all right, guys, we gotta pray. And they pray, all right, Lord, Sanballat and Tobiah, they're out there, they're gonna attack us. Please help us, please protect us, da-da-da-da-da. Can't you imagine just one person in there going, well, if we really trusted God, we wouldn't even put a guard out, because you guys just don't have faith enough that God will guard the city. And then Nehemiah what are you talking about? Shut up. Because you need to do both. We pray, and sometimes the answer to our prayer, God uses you to do it. So pray like it all depends on God. Work like it all depends on you. You need both. Pray and put in the job applications. Jobs aren't going to apply to you. You have to apply to the job. Pray and walk across the room and start a conversation with her, man. You've been staring at her the whole church service. It's weird. You need to talk to her. She's not going to talk to you probably. I said something similar in first service, and I thought, isn't it weird how, this is totally useless. I don't know why I'm even wasting my time or your time with this, but like, you know what's changed so much since back in my day? Now I'm really old. It used to be a slight stigma if you found like the person that you're married online. I don't know if you guys remember that. It used to be like, oh, it's eHarmony. But now it's like, how else would you find somebody? So it's totally shifted. You can be an introvert and still find the one that you'll love. So, but you have to be out there. So you're welcome for the dating advice. I also thought about, our church, I don't know if you guys know this, it's weird. Usually churches like will either adopt or reflect somewhat of the personality of the pastor, which I just want to apologize for. But our executive, Chris, our executive pastor, he preached last week. Chris did an awesome job, everybody. He I want to say weekly complains to me, why is your church so introverted? I'm like, it's because they're like me. But I forget what I was going to talk about. Oh, I was giving dating advice. So I had this idea, I was going to like have all the single people raise their hands. But it only works if your church is not introverted, so we'll do it. We'll find another time. Just mentally prepare yourself. Maybe at some point I'll do that and I'll have you look around. Why? Where else what are you going to go to a bar and find somebody? This is a good place to meet somebody. What? Just don't be creepy. Never mind. All right. Prayer. We're still in church. All right. Here's what happens next. So they pray. They set guards on the city. Verse 10. Then the people of Judah began to complain. Uh-oh. The workers are getting tired and there's so much rubble to be moved. We will never be able to build the wall ourselves. Oof. Then verse 11. Meanwhile, our enemies were saying, before they know what's happening, we'll swoop down on them and kill them and end their work. Man, if you'd never read this story before and you just stopped right here, you would have to ask the question, is this wall actually going to get done? Because this is like a super discouraging part in the story where you kind of drop down to this moment where now not only do you have opposition on the outside of the wall, you've got opposition on the inside of the wall. You've got people now saying, I don't think we can do this. You have people on the outside saying you shouldn't do it. You have people on the inside saying, I don't think we can. And I don't know about you, I can handle opposition on the outside, but opposition on the inside is the most difficult kind, isn't it? If you get opposition from people who you perceive should be on your team, that's the kind that'll steal your heart, right? So I imagine if I'm Nehemiah and I heard it's verse 10 that discourages me, now verse 11. Verse 11, I expect it. I expect people on the outside to be coming for me. I expect people on the outside to try and stop me. But when I get people on the inside going, now I'm hurting. And it hits me different emotionally. So I learned something that kind of helped me understand this a little bit more just this past week. So me and my wife went to San Diego this past weekend. I was for a pastor's thing, but I took Lisa with me because I thought that like in between sessions we'd be able to hang out and because I just heard that Southern California is supposed to be sunny and 70 degrees all year round. That's what I heard. Somebody told me that. So I took her with me, and it was nicer here than it was there. So screw you guys. But it was literally 50 and rainy sometimes. So anyways, we went down there. She came with me, which is awesome. But the plane rides, man. So I don't love planes. It's weird. Like if I think too much about sitting in the plane and like look at the floor and go, man, there's nothing below me. There's nothing below me. Like that will mess with your mind. So you have to like not think about that if you're like me. And so when we were going out, all these airports have all these like weather warnings. And they're telling us it's going to be like an interesting when you drop down through the different layers of atmosphere to land. The pilot comes over the intercom, one of the flights, and he had like a serious voice on. It's like, hey, listen, sit down and buckle your seatbelts. I was like, oh, that's good. And like this week leading up, we were joking about me dying. So that you can't not think of, like that's the time when you think about that stuff. Like, oh, smart, Adam, way to joke about dying. And now God's like, yeah, here you go. It's going to happen. So it was messing with my mind. But I was like, good. I had a book. I was like, all right, I'm going to dive mentally into this book. I'm going to be fine. And like, so we start dropping to descent. And man, like I looked up and like everybody's head's doing this. And the plane's like just getting shook. And I'm like, all right. But then, stinking lady behind me, every time the plane jostled, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, every time. And I'm like, yeah, I'm talking to him too, shut up. And at first, I was annoyed. But I will tell you, like, as you're trying to go through something like that, it starts to get inside of you when somebody does that, like, oh my God, and I find myself going, oh my God, okay, like this is, maybe I should be nervous. And like, it bothered, so now, in the moment, I had to readjust myself, and I pulled out my Bible app and I read Philippians 4, which is real, don't be anxious about anything, including plane turbulence. Cast all your cares before God. God, I really want to live. I'm sorry about the death jokes. Please let me live. And the peace of God did come and guard my heart. It was good. But as I reflected back on that, what bothered me was, yes, the turbulence was a thing, but that I let how someone else was perceiving what was happening affect how I perceived it. That's the thing that got to me. Like, if it would have just been me and I would have just been able to be in my own headspace, it would have been fine, but it was this other person's emotional state that came in and affected mine. And I was like, man, that's lame. Like, I thought you were better than that, man. But I think that happens sometimes, especially when it comes to the people's reaction when they're on the inside of the wall. Now, let me show you what Nehemiah does. Nehemiah, verse 14. Then I looked over the situation. I called together the nobles and the rest of the people and said to them, don't be afraid of the enemy. Remember the Lord who is great and glorious, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. This is one of the great little mini sermons in the Bible. Because if you look at the momentum of the story and the way everything was going, you have this ramped up opposition on the outside. Now you've got an undercurrent of opposition even on the inside. People are tired, they're discouraged, they're afraid. Everything in the story is leaning one way, but then you have Nehemiah who's cutting through it like a knife, and he makes this speech. So I want to point out two things here. One is he chooses to be a thermostat, not a thermometer. And that's one of our values here. We talk about not wanting to reflect the temperature around us, but wanting to set the temperature around us. He didn't freak out because everyone else was freaking out. He didn't let somebody behind him saying, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. He didn't let that bother him. He's like, no, I know who I'm called to be. I know what we're called to do. And not only did he check himself, he allowed God to help him lead others. So he doesn't let the temperature that's going this way affect him. He brings it back, and he leads people towards faith and action. So in opposition, especially when you got the people around you, close to you, starting to hesitate, starting to maybe question if it's the right direction, be a thermostat, not a thermometer. Don't reflect that temperature, set a temperature. And so how, right? That sounds awesome. I want to be a thermostat, not a thermometer. Cool, Pastor. How though? So the how is built into what he says here. This is the second thing. He refocuses on the why of what they're doing, right? They're not just building a wall. He's like, hey, remember the why, right? Remember the Lord. He has to say, remember the Lord in his little sermon because they weren't remembering the Lord. Because a lot of times when you're all caught up in all this stuff, and you got Sanballat and Tobiah on the outside, and you got people on the inside, and all this opposition, you get your head down and you start looking at the wall and the rubble and the enemies, and your head's down. So Nehemiah's like, get your head up. Remember the Lord. He's the one who called us to this. God wants us to do this. It doesn't matter what Sanballat and Tobiah want. It doesn't matter that you're tired. It doesn't matter that there's rubble everywhere. If God's called us to do this thing, let's do this thing. And then he tells them, remember why, like who and why we're doing this. For your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your homes. There's a reason for this. We're not just building a wall because it's cool. We believe God's going to do something with this. We believe it's going to make other people's lives better. So as you take a step of faith, as you go to do what God's called you to do, you're going to have to remind yourself why you're doing it. It's not just the what, it's the why. You have to preach to yourself sometimes. So I don't know what your next step of obedience is in your faith. Maybe it's just coming to church. Just you being here was huge. That's awesome. Don't let, because there's going to be, don't let the opposition come in and say, all right, that was a one-time thing, you're good. Don't do that. This is a step. This is not the whole path. Or maybe one of your things is you want to be a different kind of parent, but you're parenting the same kind of kids and you're trying to be a different kind of parent. And there's a transition period. Don't let that discourage you. Don't stop. Maybe it's getting out of debt or being obedient in giving or some aspect of money, man. Or maybe it's reading your Bible or praying or some new spiritual thing that you're trying to start. Expect a fight. Expect opposition. It's coming. It's coming. But don't let it discourage you. I want to show you one little other aspect of what happens here in Nehemiah chapter 4, 16 and 17. But from then on, only half of my men worked, while the other half stood guard with spears and shields and bows and coats of mail. The leaders stationed themselves behind the people of Judah who were building the wall. Laborers carried their work with one hand, supporting a load, and with the other hand holding a weapon. The King James Version of actually verse 17 is better. It says they had a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. And I love that visual. That they didn't let the threat of a fight stop them from working. So they had the trowel. They were going to lay the mortar. They were going to keep laying the bricks. But they weren't going to not be ready for a fight either. Whichever one. I'll carry a trowel. I'll carry a sword. And I think that kind of has to be our mentality. If you want to follow God, if you want to take steps towards God, you got to have both. A trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. Ready to fight, to do the thing that God has called you to do. Ready to face any opposition inside or outside the walls. And the other thing I want to point out about these verses is that they didn't do it alone. They didn't do it alone. It wasn't one guy standing out there with a sword, it was an army. So the way I wanted to end today is I'm going to have our prayer team come up, and they're going to stand here, there'll be some in the back, and they're here to pray with you. So if you're facing opposition today, and maybe you're tired or hurting because opposition can leave some wounds. I just want to invite you up here to pray. And I don't think prayer is just some idle thing. I don't think it's just words. I actually think that this can be a form of fighting. We can draw swords together over here and over here in the corner. So I want to make that available to you. If you feel like you need prayer for some opposition you're facing, that's available. Maybe you just need to pray right where you're at, but don't do that thing where you talk yourself out of it. Like, I should go pray, but no, I'm not going to because you have 6 other reasons. If you feel God nudging towards it, go do it. But I also want to just make this front of the stage available. We don't have an altar. It's not going to be comfortable. If you want to come up here and maybe you just feel like you need to kneel up here and pray to God, you're allowed to do that too. I don't want to dictate how you have an interaction with God here. Or maybe you just need to stay right where you're at, but I just wanted to open up all of that as a possibility. But let's take some time and pray about this opposition that you're facing. Let's bring it to God. Maybe it's an emotional processing that you need to do. Maybe it's a request. Maybe it's more of a, all right, Lord, I need you kind of a prayer. So prayer team, why don't you guys come up, and I want to read one more verse to you. I read that verse to you in Zechariah. That Satan was accusing Jeshua. Remember that? Satan's accusing Jeshua. So here's what happens next. I just want you to picture the scene. It's the throne room of heaven. God is on his throne. Satan's over here. Jeshua's standing here, all beat up and all broken because he's the high priest of with a temple-less faith. And Satan's accusing. Satan's telling him, you can't do this. You don't have what it takes and all this stuff. And here's what happens next. Verse 2. And the Lord said to Satan, booming from the throne, God says, I, the Lord, reject your accusations, Satan. Yes, the Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebukes you. This man is like a burning stick that has been snatched from a fire. Anybody feel like that? So God says, no, I'm not going to listen to your accusations, Satan. And that's what we have, Christian. We have an advocate. Jesus is right there with us when Satan comes to accuse you, when Satan comes to use your thoughts to come at you. You need to know you have an advocate, the high priest. You have Jesus up in heaven going, no, Satan, no. You're a stick that's been pulled from fire. You may be a little charred, a little burnt. You may be smoking a little bit, but God still has a plan and a purpose for you. God still has a plan and a purpose for you. So pray with me. Jesus, I know there's some people in this room who are facing opposition today. They want to follow you. You want to take a step. Man, I pray you'd be with them, Lord. Maybe they're hurting. Maybe they're tired. pray that you would renew their strength, Lord. I pray for the person who feels nudged to come up and get prayer. Lord, I pray that they'd do it. Let them talk themselves out of it. I pray for the person who needs to just come up and kneel at this altar, Lord, and maybe just pour their guts out to you right now. Or maybe the person just needs to sit in their seat and lift up this calling that you've given them on their life and the opposition they're facing. Lord, I pray that anybody in this room would just have an experience with you in this moment. And we leave here ready to fight for what you've called us to. In Jesus' name I pray.